Good evening, and thank you for joining us. Welcome to the OI Online. I am Theo van den Hout, Interim Director of the Oriental Institute, and I'd like to welcome you to this at-home members lecture. The generous support of our OI members helps to make this programming possible, keeping it free and available to the public. So I would like to extend a heartfelt thank to all of our OI members. If you are not an OI member, please do join us online by clicking the link in this video's description. Now, tonight, it's my pleasure to introduce Professor Margarete van Ess. Margarete van Ess is head of the Orient Department of the German Archaeological Institute. She has specialized in Middle Eastern archaeology and received her PhD in 1996 from the Freie Universität Berlin. She carried out archaeological fieldwork in Uruk and Al-Hira-Najaf in southern Iraq, in the Kurdistan region of Iraq, as well as in Baalbek, Lebanon. She was acting director of the German Archaeological Institute in Baghdad also. Between 2003 and 2012, she was member of the UNESCO Experts Group on the Safeguarding of Iraqi Cultural Heritage, and since then has been active in different cultural heritage fields in the Middle East. She's a very prolific author of several books and numerous articles. Her scientific interests are building archaeology, studies in ancient Middle Eastern pottery, and landscape archaeology. So we are very excited tonight to have Professor van Ess with us today to present a lecture about her recent work at the legendary site of Uruk. So please join me in welcoming Dr. van Ess as she will lecture on news from Old Uruk. Normally, we would hear a warm applause right now, but in the present circumstances, it will be muted, but with no less excitement and expectation. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, dear colleagues, students and friends, good evening. I have the pleasure to introduce you to the German Archaeological Institute's new research at Uruk in southern Iraq. The Mesopotamian city of Uruk has fascinated archaeologists and historians for over 100 years. Located halfway between Baghdad and Basra in Iraq, it was once part of an urbanized landscape that developed in southern Iraq along what were then the courses of the Euphrates and Tigris rivers, or rather the canals that branched off from them. We are in the very elongated delta of the two rivers, which has a gradient of only 40 meters between Baghdad and Basra. Uruk was one of the southernmost cities and for the most of its existence was located on the same canal as Nippur, a place where the University of Chicago conducts research. The coast of the Persian Gulf was then some distance inland, and looking at the low gradient, we reconstruct the landscape east of Uruk as similarly marshy as was the case until recently in what is now the marshland of southern Iraq. The people living there had to live with the problem of marshes and floods, and one response was to build canals to better control the water. We still find the situation today in the region of Uruk. Uruk was first chosen as a settlement site in the 5th millennium BC during the so-called Late Ubaid period. In the 4th century AD, that is the Sasanian period, the site was abandoned, thus existed with few interruptions for about 5,000 years. Very briefly, I would like to take you on a journey through our current knowledge of the importance of Uruk before moving on to my today's topic, the preliminary results of our research since 2016. German scientists have been conducting research here since 1912. so the archaeological fieldwork under my direction has a long tradition. The focus of the earlier excavations, marked in red on the plan, was mainly on the architecture in the center of the city. Shorter research was also devoted to King Sinkarshid's second millennium palace in the west, the 1st to 3rd century AD temple of Gyareus in the southeast, as well as several small excavation sites where dwellings and craft areas were investigated. The excavations at Uruk became famous for several reasons. The investigation of the great Eanna sanctuary of the city goddess Ishtar, who was worshipped as the goddess of love and war. Occupying the center of the city, this sanctuary was first built in the early 3rd millennium and served as a religious site for over 3,000 years. Spectacular was architecture dating back to even older times, namely the second half of the 4th millennium, the so-called late Uruk period. It is characterized by monumental buildings, many of which are decorated with wall mosaics made of clay cones. In the rubble of these buildings were found about 5,000 fragments of the earliest cuneiform tablets, which was probably developed at this place from 3200 BC. At that time, writing was used exclusively for administration. From analysis of the text, but also from observations of the development of mass-produced pottery, as well as from the way seals were used, it is deduced that the population lived in social stratification and thus complex political conditions. Theories in this regard have been developed largely on the basis of the findings from Uruk, as well as comparisons with contemporaneous phenomena elsewhere. This fascinating networking in the 4th millennium BC, which we like to call the Uruk world system, is not my topic today. From Uruk, some of the most spectacular art objects are known, like the face of the composite statue, the so-called Lady of Varka, or a cult vase with relief representation of an offering procession. Uruk also plays a special role in 3 early epics, the best known of which is the Gilgamesh Epic. Gilgamesh is mythical king of Uruk who makes a name for himself through special deeds. The archaeology and history of Uruk in the early period somewhat outshines the later development of the city and its contribution to Mesopotamian history. We assume that in the Uruk period and at the beginning of the subsequent early dynastic I period, at the beginning of the 3rd millennium, Uruk played a political role that was clearly relevant beyond the city. The city lost this role in the first half of the 3rd millennium BC and never regained it. It remained, however, an important religious center, which kings of many dynasties and periods maintained and architecturally renewed. The scribal tradition also continued, and so even in the Seleucid period, that is the 3rd and 2nd century BC, it can be seen that scholars had knowledge of millennia-old knowledge and drew on local scribal practices. Famous in this late period were astronomers who dealt not only with astrology, but also with mathematical astronomy. Their fame is still reflected in Strabon's Geographica. Today, I would like to give you an insight into the additional field research we have been able to carry out in Uruk since 2016 and the initial results it has yielded. The research is embedded in a program that takes into account Uruk's status as a World Heritage Site. Uruk is one of the 3 archaeological sites that have been included in the World Heritage Property, the Ahwar of southern Iraq, refuge of biodiversity, and the relict landscape of the Mesopotamian cities. Not only because of this, but especially because of the long periods of crisis in Iraq, during which no conservation measures could take place, it is now necessary to invest intensively in conservation and to provide meaningful visitors' guidance and information. Our research, therefore, while primarily stemming from scientific questions, also takes into account aspects of public interest and conservation. We are currently carrying out 3 projects: a survey in the surrounding area of Uruk, an excavation at the city wall, and an excavation at the religious structure south of the city. Today, I will mainly present the results of the excavations at the city wall and the sanctuary. Briefly, however, a few remarks about the survey. We are mapping all topographical and archaeological structures within a radius of 3 kilometers around the city wall of Uruk, collecting the movable archaeological material and using it to analyze how the land use directly outside the city wall was in different periods. This includes tracing the watercourses, that means the riverbeds and all canals, as well as documenting and interpreting installations, buildings, and villages. An exceedingly wide variety of remains have been preserved in the environs of Uruk, and the dating ranges from the late Uruk period to the Sasanian period. We have still only been able to visit a small part of the area and have concentrated on areas endangered by modern changes. The goal is to work with the local antiquities administration to specify the buffer zone necessary for World Heritage sites from an archaeological perspective. Initial results show that in the north and east we have extensive use, at least since the 3rd millennium BC, divided into fields, production zones, and probably associated structures. In the south and west, fields seem to predominate. Also, some small mounds are found. However, here the terrain is more modernly remodeled than in the north and east. Another major research topic, which I will discuss only in passing today, is the analysis of the changes of the river courses and canals, which not only passed Uruk outside the city wall, but also ran through the city. We are following them up with detailed analysis of topographic data as well as by magnetometry. This will play a role in a moment when we will have a closer look at the city wall. Uruk and its excavations are gladly visited when circumstances permit. The modern gate is in the west of the city, here at number 1. From there, one drives up to the center of the city or also east around the city wall to the Parthian temple of Garaeus, marked K. Visitors do not know that they are driving along the ancient city wall and so far do not learn anything about its importance. We want to change this and have combined the planning for the necessary explanations with a scientific investigation. The excavation site is located near the modern gate and is marked here with a red oval. What makes the city wall of Uruk so significant, and what do we know so far? The city wall, if you know it, is still clearly visible in the terrain. It is preserved at different heights, at one point over 6.5 meters high, at our excavation point less than 2 meters. After wet, rainy days, however, the structure is often clearly visible because the wall's building material dries faster than the surrounding area. Its main wall and bastions can then be mapped from the ground And this is exactly how the course of the wall has been documented. We know from this that it is almost 9.5 kilometers long and had about 900 bastions. From previous excavations, we know the structure of the main walls and bastions, and therefore we know that it was mostly 5 meters thick, including with a rampart 9 meters thick. If we extrapolate these dimensions together with the preserved minimum height, we know that at least 300 million bricks were used. I will come back to this later. All ancient Near Eastern specialists know the wall from the Gilgamesh Epic, where King Gilgamesh is mentioned as the builder of it. If it had indeed been built by one ruler, it would have been a truly celebratory, huge building achievement. However, King Gilgamesh had not yet been historically recorded. Geophysical measurements in the area where we are now excavating showed that the wall seems to have more wall courses than previously known. In the rectangle marked in red, the parallel courses of the wall and the bastions of the wall are clearly visible. To the right of the wall, that means within the city, are adjoining fields irrigated by canals of varying width. These in turn branch off a 10-meter wide canal that runs through the entire western city. Outside the city walls run the so-called ring canal, which surrounds the entire city. Thus, the city wall is bordered on the right and left by watercourses. It is also located in a low place and serves here not only to protect the city, but also has to deal structurally with the wet conditions. Both the situation between the channels and the complex structure interests us. In addition, the wall here is not preserved particularly high. This offers the chance to quickly reach the lowest construction phases and the foundations archaeologically. So there is the possibility to easily investigate the early period of the wall here. The location along the visitors' path to the Garaeus temple will later allow us to offer information about the wall. We are not the first to investigate the city wall. In the 1930s, Arnold Nöldeke and Arndt von Haller excavated information on its construction at several locations, marked in red here. The photo shows the section through the city wall in the area where it is highest preserved. The excavations showed that the oldest wall was built of so-called plano-convex bricks, bricks with a hump on one side, which are typically building materials for the first half of the 3rd millennium BC. Older structures were not found. The city wall existed until Seleucid period, almost until the turn of time, and was of course repaired several times. King Anam boasts in the 18th century BC of having renovated the ancient wall of Gilgamesh, the first clear connection between the city wall and the legendary king. The wall was thus first erected sometime between the beginning and middle of the 3rd millennium and is known to be the legendary work of Gilgamesh no later than the beginning of the 2nd millennium BC. Another factor in favor of dating not earlier than the early dynastic period is that the city was smaller before that, as suggested by the mapping of late Uruk period pottery, map on the right hand, and blue marked of find areas, and that of the early dynastic 1 period left. But what does this mean in detail? The early excavations did not mark any progress in dating the early wall because there were no natural scientific methods of analysis yet, and dating via pottery typology is firstly not for architects, and secondly was not sufficiently advanced at that time. So another of our current concerns is to get a more accurate dating of the wall. Our investigation area includes the wall courses and the ring canals outside, on the left side of the picture. The actual excavation area is smaller at the moment in order to be able to precisely record all details. This is the area highlighted in light blue. Referring to the findings documented elsewhere in the 1930s, we are in the area of the oldest core wall, as well as the so-called Verbrämung, a sort of casing. And the bastions marked here in red and blue. All structures were built of plano-convex materials at the earlier excavation sites. And we also recorded this type of bricks and find the same building material. In the northeast, we dug a deep sounding to investigate the foundations of the core wall. The core wall, in turn, it turned out, was built in different steps. Designated here with the number 6, is the uppermost part, which corresponds well with the description from the early excavations. Below that, design 5 is an area composed of extremely condensed clay or mud bricks. This may be an area that was designated as a hard mud block 80 years ago and was interpreted as a foundation area. Layers 4 and 3 below it, which we observed, are also similarly hard and may not have been separated as a separate construction area at that time. What is new, however, is that this extremely compact wall was placed on a bed of pure sand, which in turn was placed in a specially excavated foundation trench, here marked with 2 and 1. From looking at the pottery that comes from this sounding, I would like to identify 2 construction phases. Layers that raise the level of use in front of the wall differ in terms of pottery forms. While the pottery coming from the lower areas is very similar to what has been excavated elsewhere in Uruk as early dynastic 1 pottery, there are additional pottery types in the upper part that elsewhere hint for a somewhat younger period, but is also early dynastic 1 in date, here marked with a red line. Few organic samples which we could give into 14C analysis support this. From the area of the foundation trench comes a sample that is strikingly similar to those that come from Jemdet Nasser period features in the center of Uruk. This would be the period between 3200 and 2900 BC. However, all 14C samples from this period indicate a so-called plateau. That means that there are several almost equal possibilities as to which period the sample might come from. Organic remains dating to the 29th to 27th century BC were found in the decay layers of the lowest construction. They indicate that the upper parts of the wall must be correspondingly younger. Features on the western side of the wall that is in direction to the ring canal are also exciting. The features interpreted in the magnetograms as individual wall rings turn out to be massive brick ramparts of mud brick of varying density, perhaps also embankments or platforms, due to which the wall has a width of almost 20 meters at the moment. It's these structures here. The foundations of these constructions need to be studied before it is possible to assess what function they had. According to the pottery findings, they date to the younger early dynastic I and early dynastic II periods. Our excavations, which are not yet completed, already allow us to establish the dating of the city wall in the early dynastic I period. Probably there was a first construction at the beginning of the 3rd millennium BC and a renewal about 200 years later. All younger construction periods, which the wall certainly once had at this site as well, were lost due to destruction and erosion, which may be very late Seleucid to Parthian in period. At least that is what the surface pottery suggests. If the wall can be dated so early, then it belongs to a period in which Uruk is also undergoing other architectural upheavals. At the end of the late Uruk period, the architecture shown at the beginning is completely leveled and replaced by the new construction of the Eanna sanctuary. It is a measure that took place on several hectares of land and was radical. During the 3rd millennium, it received several changes, here marked in red and green. Nevertheless, old boundaries are respected, and it can be seen that although the function has changed, a complete break is not made. At the same time, a population growth is taking place that clearly exceeds anything seen before. I had shown you the maps. Areas of the city are now being populated that previously belonged to the outskirts. Their supply will have led to the fact that one had to think increasingly about the protection of the existing gardens and fields close to the settled areas. Presumably, the initial concern was not so much protection from enemies as protection from unforeseen water events and from animals. The construction of this 9.5 kilometer long city wall falls into this period. On the one hand, it provides protection. On the other hand, it builds new barriers, especially for supply and water management. Its construction must therefore have been accompanied with considerations for the canalization of the water in the city. There will have been two megalomaniac construction tasks for the rulers of that time: the construction of the main canals in the city and the construction of the city wall. These are truly memorable measures, and so it is no wonder if later generations memorize this in the Gilgamesh Epic. Whether the measures are implemented by one ruler or by several, however, thus still remains open. In a great leap in time, I present our second excavation site. A few hundred meters east of the excavation of the city wall, also located at the visitors' route to the Garaeus temple, there is a mound which was investigated by magnetometer prospection in 2002. It is located outside the city wall and has been known since the mid-19th century because bricks with inscriptions and reliefs were repeatedly found there. Geophysics revealed that it is a large complex, probably with a large walled courtyard here, on the west side of which there are three structures parallel to each other here, with their entrances open to the east. While the northernmost appears comparatively destroyed, the two southern ones are well preserved. The central structure appears to follow typical Babylonian building arrangements, while the southernmost resembles in plan the 15th century BC Kara Indash temple in the Yana sanctuary, here shown in plan and image, whose molded brick facade is on display in the Iraq Museum in Baghdad and the Museum of the Ancient Near East in Berlin. The bricks with inscriptions collected from the surface at our site were made by King Nabonide, who ruled between 556 and 539 BC. The molded bricks were more similar to those of King Kara Indash, but clearly do not come from the Kara Indash temple in the Yana sanctuary. The structure is located at the exit of the main channel from Uruk, here marked in blue, and is accessible by boat via a side channel down here. From the north, there will have been an entrance and access for pedestrians. Our excavation focused on the southernmost building. Immediately below the surface, the debris of the building became visible, which, like the walls, is made of burnt bricks. As the magnetogram already showed, it is a building with a large main room as well as an anteroom and with a door in the central axis. The outer corners are reinforced by double-stepped corner bastions, and in the middle of the western narrow side, a projecting pillar was added. See the arrows here. In more recent phases of construction, adobe additions were made on all sides excavated so far. 2 pedestals in the main room are the only additions and evidence of a function. The debris from the backfill dates from the Seleucid to early Parthian period, according to the evidence of the pottery. And the analysis of the building development also suggests that the structure in its last state belongs to this period. The building plan, the development, the outer facade emphasized by pillars or corner bastions, and the pedestals suggests that it was a temple. The building material for this building comes mainly from older structures. Also, bricks with a triangular stamps typical for the Seleucid period are also found. A good portion, both from debris and the walls, consists of molded and stamped bricks. However, they were collected from other buildings and reused for our building. It is remarkable that the decorative sides of all point into the interior of the wall, visible here. Thus, it was not intended to see the older faces. Molded bricks include twisted half columns, which, according to comparison, represent a stylized palm tree trunks. Bricks with figural decoration are also quite numerous. Stars of various kinds predominate, but there are also bricks with partial decoration of persons and gods. I show a crown of horns of a divine being down here, and comparisons from elsewhere here. In a layer below this structure, remains of a brick construction came to light, which probably belonged to a gate. Here were several bricks which carry a so far unknown inscription. King Kara Indash renews for the goddess Nanaya a shining kai. Alexa Bartelmus will present this inscription as part of our preliminary report in the next issue of the Zeitschrift für Orientarchäologie. Bricks with this inscription, which was not known so far from Uruk, were also found in the rubble of the well-preserved temple of the higher building level, but there in company with inscribed bricks of King Nabonide, of Cyrus the Great, and the triangle stamped bricks of the Seleucid period. Because of this clear secondary use of the building material, which theoretically could have been taken from far away or also from several older buildings, we cannot name the building with certainty so far. However, since both the inscription and the molded burnt bricks in exactly this decoration are not known from Uruk so far, the assumption can be made that the material was not transported far and perhaps an older building was used as a quarry at this place. The pottery encountered shows us that the site was used at least since the early dynastic period. Pottery, presumably of the entire third millennium of the Old Babylonian, Middle, and New Babylonian periods, is represented as well as that of the Seleucid and Parthian periods. We grasp here, directly in front of the city wall, therefore, a terrain used over millennia, which has a religious character with the buildings proven in the geophysics and the excavation. At the foot of the hill are burial grounds of the Middle Babylonian to Parthian period. The late tombs extend to just outside the walls of the structure, but are not located within the building. On the contrary, they clearly respect the building, and this obviously even at a time when the building had already been destroyed. Thus, we hope to obtain diverse and detailed clues about the individual handling of the site, but also about the original function of the structure. For this purpose, however, further excavations are necessary. I would like to conclude by passing on a little information about our conservation program. Iraq suffered and still suffers in part from multiple crises and armed conflicts. For a long time, it was not possible to work on site, neither for foreigners nor for the Iraqi colleagues of the State Board of Antiquities and Heritage. As a result, several excavated structures that were kept open to visitors could not be regularly maintained for a long time and are in a critical state of preservation. Others were backfilled after excavation, but also require our attention now. A comprehensive concept was therefore developed together with the local colleagues, specifying what should remain backfilled for protection or to be additionally backfilled and what should be presented. Some structures, such as the Eana ziggurat, have been exposed to the elements for millennia and to decay since leaving the site in the 4th century AD. Because of its exposed location, the structure can only be protected but not backfilled, and did not want to be because it is a particularly vivid example of a ziggurat structure. For the structures that are to be presented, we have developed conservation concepts that are currently being transferred into detailed execution plans according to a priority list. This is accompanied by concepts for visitors, circuits, and information media. All concepts are being coordinated with the responsible Iraqi authorities, as well as shortly with UNESCO and ICOMOS. The process is still going on. On site, we have therefore so far limited ourselves to emergency conservation measures designed to halt acute decay. All measures are reversible, so they can be withdrawn for a final measure if necessary. Using the example of the west corner of the Eana ziggurat, I will explain part of our methodology. The west corner protrudes in a special way and has done so since the beginning of the documentation in 1912. A looter's hole below this corner, as well as the cleaning measures and documentation by the German excavators in 1928-29, gave the erosion a larger attack surface. Erosion was now able to attack more strongly from below as well, and the entire west corner was now, after 90 years, in danger of collapsing on the outer sides. With newly manufactured mud bricks, following the characteristics of the old mud bricks, the facade was completed and thus provided with a protective skin on which the erosion can now work. The modern bricks are marked as such, but before long will be hardly recognizable as additions to laymen. In order to implement the measure, manufacturing of adobe bricks in the region was first reactivated, the goal and the working method being discussed with the craftsmen involved. And then the old lorry system of the excavation was activated for implementation. This made it possible to gently transport the considerable amount of building materials to the ziggurat. At the same time, the action and we served as a special tourist attraction. Emergency conservation measures were also carried out at the Anu Ziggurat, the Irigal, the Garaeus temple, and the stone building. We are combining our actions with workshops and training at structures throughout Iraq to make as many colleagues as possible aware of the urgent measures that are by no means unique to Uruk. We very much hope that the current COVID-19 situation will allow us to continue the work in the fall. We would very much like to see our friends and colleagues on the ground again and continue what has been started. Time is pressing because the erosion and also the aggravation of climatic conditions does not wait. I thank you for your attention.
For over 100 years, the OI has been a leading research center for the study of ancient Middle Eastern civilizations. Join us in uncovering the past and learn about the beginnings of our lives as humans together. Become a member by visiting oi.uchicago.edu/member.